One city's condition had its governor in tears.
It's just heartbreaking.
While Trump was forced to point out the terrible conditions of another city.
Look at Los Angeles with the tents and the horrible, horrible, disgusting conditions.
And this other city has the worst crime problem in America.
Tripled to quadrupled the amount of violence from what we saw in 2018, 2019.
From natural disasters to outrageous violent crime statistics, the conditions in these 10 cities will leave you shocked. New Orleans, Louisiana, the Katrina effect that never ended. What's happening in the Big Easy right now is nothing short of an urban catastrophe that makes Hurricane Katrina look like just the beginning of a much longer, more brutal disaster that exposes the complete failure of American urban policy. New Orleans has experienced the highest population decline in the entire United States, and it's not even close. We're talking about a city that has lost more than half its population since Hurricane Katrina struck in 2005, with over 50% of residents displaced due to flooding that turned entire neighborhoods into wastelands, and even brought its then governor to tears.
The situation is untenable. It's just heartbreaking.
Residents even swore to leave the city.
We leaving next time. They could say a windstorm, just a flood or whatever, anything. We gone.
Sadly, many neighborhoods still resemble those disaster zones nearly 2 decades later. But here's where this story gets absolutely infuriating. Nearly 20 years after Katrina, the bleeding hasn't stopped. In fact, it's getting worse. The New Orleans metro area lost 45,000 residents from 2020 to 2023, representing a devastating 4.3% drop, while Orleans Parish alone shed about 20,000 people since 2020. This isn't natural population fluctuation. This is urban hemorrhaging on a scale that should trigger federal emergency intervention. The economic picture is equally brutal and exposes the shocking reality of a city that simply cannot provide opportunities for its residents despite billions in federal recovery funding. While city officials desperately try to spin positive employment numbers, the truth is that employment is projected to increase by only 1.3 to 1.44% in 2025, ranking second among Louisiana metro areas, but representing stagnation compared to other regions experiencing robust growth. The unemployment rate sits at 4.4% as of March 2025, but this number masks the devastating reality that the jobs being created are predominantly low-wage service positions that can't support families or keep young professionals from fleeing to cities with actual career opportunities. But perhaps the most infuriating aspect of New Orleans' decline is the infrastructure disaster that reveals decades of incompetence and a mismanagement that would make third world countries blush with embarrassment. The city faces unique challenges due to its below sea level location, leading to frequent flooding and drainage issues, exacerbated by pumps and pipes over a century old. Here's the detail that will absolutely outrage you and expose the complete breakdown of municipal competence. Pothole fixes in New Orleans take an average of 355 days, compared to cities like Memphis, where the same repairs take just 5 days. The human cost of this systematic failure cannot be overstated. Families who survived Katrina and chose to rebuild their lives are now facing a second displacement, not from natural disaster, but from government incompetence so profound it has made their hometown unlivable. Detroit, Michigan. The Motor City's engine has completely died. The city's population statistics are so brutal, they're almost impossible to comprehend without understanding that we're witnessing the death of a major American metropolis in real time. Detroit's population peaked at 1,849,568 in 1950 and has plummeted to 639,111 by 2020, representing a catastrophic loss of over 61% of its residents over 7 decades. To put this in perspective, that will absolutely shock you. Detroit has lost more people than the entire current population of most American cities. We're talking about the disappearance of over 1.2 million residents. That's like the entire metropolitan areas of Austin, Nashville, or Columbus simply vanishing from the map. The economic devastation exposes the brutal reality of what happens when an entire region's economy depends on a single industry that gets gutted by globalization, automation, and policy failures that no one wants to acknowledge. Detroit's economy, once driven by the automotive industry, has stagnated due to the relocation of manufacturing plants to suburbs and other regions, automation and foreign competition, leading to a loss of nearly 150,000 jobs by the 1950s.
It used to be one of the richest cities in the world. That place was this thriving city. And then all of a sudden, the auto manufacturers pulled out.
The economic collapse culminated in the most devastating municipal bankruptcy in American history, a financial disaster so massive it should have triggered a national conversation about urban policy. In 2013, Detroit filed for bankruptcy with debts of $18.5 billion, a number so staggering it's difficult to comprehend. This wasn't just financial mismanagement. This was the complete systemic failure of urban governance on a scale never before seen in America, where an entire major city essentially went out of business. business. The infrastructure disasters reveal a city where basic services have essentially collapsed, creating living conditions that would be unacceptable in developing nations but have become normalized in America's former industrial heartland. Detroit's stormwater and sewer systems, often combined and built predominantly in the 1930s, are overwhelmed by frequent flooding, with over 40% of Detroiters experiencing household flooding.
This is a health issue for us, you know what I mean? And it's a very a serious concern.
Here's the detail that will make you absolutely furious about the human cost of municipal failure. During heavy rains, contaminated water enters basements, posing serious health risks, with power outages reducing pumping capacity to half during storms. Residents are literally living with sewage flooding their homes, while city officials issue press releases about progress and recovery. Portland, Oregon, the progressive paradise turned urban nightmare. The absolutely shocking transformation of Portland from progressive utopia to urban disaster zone represents one of the most devastating policy failures in modern American history. The economic indicators expose a city in free fall that can't provide opportunities for its residents despite national economic growth and a supposedly business-friendly state environment. The Portland Metro Chamber's 2025 State of the Economy report reveals that the region lost jobs in 2024 while the national labor market grew, with devastating losses concentrated in high-paying sectors that once defined Portland's economy and attracted educated professionals from across the country. The crime statistics paint an absolutely terrifying picture that exposes why families are fleeing what was once considered one of America's safest major cities. Portland has a crime rate of 67 per thousand residents, one of the highest in the US, with a 1 in 15 chance of becoming a victim of violent or property crime. This means that if you live in Portland, statistically, you or someone in your immediate family will be a crime victim.
It's tripled to quadrupled the amount of violence from what we saw in 2018, 2019.
These aren't marginal increases. Portland is now more than twice as dangerous as the average American city for property crime and more than twice as dangerous for violent crime. The homicide trends reveal a city that has lost control of public safety through progressive policies that prioritize criminal rights over victim protection. While homicides decreased from 94 in 2022 to 74 in 2023, this improvement means Portland still experiences nearly 3 times its pre-2019 average of 28 homicides per year. A city celebrating 74 murders as progress reveals how far standards have fallen under progressive governance. San Francisco, California, the tech capital's epic downfall. A city that was supposed to be the crown jewel of American innovation and prosperity has become a cautionary tale about what happens when radical progressive policies meet economic reality in the most dramatic and visible way possible. Unemployment rates are low at 3.7% in March 2025, but this number masks the devastating reality that explains why San Francisco's economy is fundamentally broken. Office vacancy rates peaked at 37% in 2024, reflecting the complete transformation of San Francisco's economy from a center of innovation to a city that can't even keep its signature industry housed.
So right now in downtown San Francisco, we have a vacancy rate of a little over 35%, which is the highest that we've ever recorded in the history of San Francisco.
The crime statistics reveal a city where law and order have essentially collapsed, creating conditions so dangerous that even wealthy tech executives are hiring private security or simply leaving the city they once called home. San Francisco's property crime rate significantly exceeds national norms, meaning residents still face unacceptable risks of theft, burglary, and vandalism that make normal urban life impossible. What makes these crime statistics even more infuriating is that they likely understate the real situation because of how San Francisco's progressive policies have normalized criminal behavior. Many residents and businesses have simply stopped reporting property crimes because they know nothing will happen, while others have left the city entirely, removing themselves from the crime statistics but not solving the underlying problem of a justice system that has essentially stopped functioning. The infrastructure disasters expose a city that can't provide basic services despite having some of the highest taxes and fees in America, revealing the complete failure of progressive governance to deliver results, despite extracting maximum resources from residents. San Francisco faces infrastructure issues, including aging water and sewer systems needing modernization and increased power interconnection costs. Power interconnection costs have doubled under PGE's new tariff, adding massive financial burdens to residents already struggling with impossible living costs. Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City's perfect storm of decline. What was once America's second city is now facing a perfect storm of population hemorrhaging, economic stagnation masked by statistical manipulation, crime rates that rival war zones, and infrastructure so deteriorated it threatens public safety on a daily basis. The city's population peaked at over 3.6 million in 1950 and has generally decreased since, meaning Chicago has been in decline for nearly 75 years, with only temporary reversals that mask the underlying trend. Recent data suggests possible stabilization or slight growth in 2024, with some estimates showing increases from 2023 to 2024. But this recovery comes after decades of decline and must be viewed in the context of a city that has lost over 900,000 residents since its peak. The demographic hemorrhaging is driven by factors that reveal the complete failure of Chicago's leadership to address basic quality of life issues that make cities attractive to families and businesses. Factors contributing to decline include historic disinvestment, lack of affordable housing, job losses, and closed schools and mental health clinics, disproportionately affecting Black Chicagoans, as noted by Mayor Brandon Johnson in 2024. The Chicago metropolitan area saw a net loss of nearly 300,000 people over 5 years, with domestic outmigration driven by high taxes and search for better opportunities. The crime statistics paint an absolutely terrifying picture that exposes why families are fleeing Chicago in massive numbers and why the city has become synonymous with urban violence. Chicago's crime rates are among the highest in the U.S., with a total crime rate of 40 per 1,000 residents in 2023, comprising 5.99 violent crimes and 34.01 property crimes per 1,000. Compared to national medians, for violent 19 property per 1,000, Chicago's rates are significantly higher, with over 98% of Illinois communities having lower crime rates. The homicide statistics reveal a city where murder has become normalized to a degree that would shock residents of actual war zones. Violent crimes in 2023 included 499 murders, 1,248 rapes, 10,844 robberies, and 3,378 assaults, with property crimes encompassing 7,382 burglaries, 56,737 thefts, and 26,491 motor vehicle thefts. Here's the detail that will make you absolutely furious. While homicides hit a 25-year high in 2021, they decreased by 7.3% in 2024 and 12% in 2023, which city officials celebrate as progress. But this improvement means Chicago still experiences approximately 500 murders annually, more than many entire states see in a year. Anchorage, Alaska, America's last frontier, becomes first in decline. The city's population statistics reveal a city that can't retain residents even when they have limited options to leave, which makes the decline even more devastating than cities where residents can easily relocate to nearby alternatives. Anchorage's population has experienced slight decline since 2020, with the U.S. Census Bureau estimating a drop from 291,247 in 2020 to 289,600 in 2024, representing a decrease of about 0.6%. While this might not sound catastrophic, state estimates from the Alaska Department of Labor suggest a population of 290,761 in 2024, indicating potential stabilization, but highlighting significant data discrepancies that suggest even basic population tracking has become unreliable. What makes this population decline absolutely infuriating is that Anchorage should be growing rapidly due to Alaska's resource wealth, strategic military importance, and the limited competition from other Alaskan cities. The decline is attributed to net migration losses, with factors like high housing costs, perceptions of public safety, and school quality deterring new residents, while economic forecasts show a decline of 17,000 working-age residents, 8.5%, over the past decade, exacerbated by early retirements during COVID-19 and ongoing migration losses that represent a brain drain from Alaska's most important city. The crime statistics paint an absolutely terrifying picture that exposes why families are fleeing even Alaska's largest city, despite the limited alternatives available in America's most isolated state. Anchorage has significantly high crime rates, with violent crime rates over 200% higher than the national average at 1,151 per 100,000 people, and property crime rates 41.4% above average at 2,764 per 100,000. Here's the number that will absolutely shock you and reveal the depth of Anchorage's public safety crisis. Anchorage has a 1 in 25 chance of becoming a victim, ranking it among the top 100 most dangerous U.S. cities. For context, this means Anchorage is more dangerous than most major American cities despite having a fraction of their population density and urban challenges that supposedly drive crime in the lower 48 states. New York City, the Empire State's crumbling crown jewel. What's happening in the Big Apple right now exposes how even cities with massive advantages, global importance, and seemingly unlimited resources can face existential threats when governance fails, costs spiral out of control, and basic quality of life becomes unaffordable for ordinary Americans who built their lives around the promise of opportunity that New York once represented. The economic picture shows infuriating contradictions that reveal how New York's supposed prosperity benefits only a narrow elite, while ordinary residents face impossible conditions that make basic middle-class life unaffordable. The city's economy has shown strong growth in 2024, with an average of 4.15 million private sector jobs through September, the highest ever recorded, and 83,000 more than the pre-pandemic peak. Tourism also rebounded with 65 million visitors in 2024, projected to reach 68 million in 2025. But here's what's absolutely outrageous and exposes the failure of New York's economic model. Despite record employment in tourism, 1 in 4 children are living in poverty in 2023, and there's been a 76% increase in government cash assistance recipients since February 2020, reaching nearly 560,000 by July 2024. When a city with record economic performance has 1 in 4 children living in poverty, it reveals an economic system that has completely failed working families. The crime statistics are no better as felony assaults increased by 5%, reaching 29,417, the highest in at least 24 years, and rape cases also rose. In January 2025, major crimes dropped by 16.8% compared to the previous year, but the increase in violent assaults reveals that while headline-grabbing crimes like murder decrease, the daily reality of urban violence continues to make life stressful for ordinary residents. Infrastructure challenges remain devastating despite New York's massive tax base and federal importance. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority has a $62.1 billion state of good repair backlog, covering transit systems across a 12-county region with capital investment needs totaling approximately $64 billion through 2024. This backlog underscores the challenge of maintaining over 1,700 miles of subway and rail track, 150 miles of tunnels, and numerous stations amidst escalating costs that outpace revenue sources. Extreme weather events exacerbate these challenges, with the need for robust administrative capacity to handle sinkholes, flooding, and heat waves, which could save billions in future costs if addressed now. Efforts to address these challenges include Governor Hochul's 2025 State of the State address, proposing historic investments in public transit and modernizing rail service, but the scale of need vastly exceeds available resources. Boston, Massachusetts, the hub's shocking stagnation. The city's economic conditions show mixed signals that mask underlying problems and reveal a city that benefits from institutional presence rather than dynamic economic growth that creates opportunities for working families. The Federal Reserve's Beige Book report from January 2025 indicates that Boston's economic activity increased slightly, with employment levels steady and wages rising at a modest pace. However, this modest growth in an era of national economic expansion suggests relative underperformance and missed opportunities. Specific sectors show varied performance. Air travel surpassed 2019 levels, with domestic passenger traffic through Boston increasing, while tourism activity rose modestly, though restaurants reported weaker sales. Retail revenues rose slightly, with consumers remaining price-conscious, and ITE and software services experienced stable, healthy demand. But these gains represent incremental improvement rather than the dynamic growth that should characterize a city with Boston's advantages. The infrastructure challenges reveal serious underlying problems that threaten Boston's long-term competitiveness and expose decades of deferred maintenance and inadequate investment in basic systems. Massachusetts, including Boston, received an overall grade of C in 2021 from the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, with 55% of roads in poor or fair condition and 8.9% of bridges structurally deficient. Here are the numbers that will absolutely shock you about the scale of Boston's infrastructure crisis. There are large funding needs for drinking water and wastewater systems, estimated at $12.2 billion and $11.1 billion, respectively. Categories include aviation, C+, bridges, C, dams, C+, drinking water, D+, inland waterways, D, ports, C, rail, C+, roads, D+, stormwater, D+, transit, D+, and wastewater, C. The transportation infrastructure reveals particular challenges for a city that depends on efficient connections to maintain its role as a regional economic center. Boston's transportation plans, such as Go Boston 2030 revisioned, aim to address these issues, focusing on mobility, infrastructure, and safety. But the scale of funding required remains a massive challenge that threatens the city's ability to compete with other major metropolitan areas that have invested more aggressively in modern infrastructure. The Big Dig project, completed in the late 1990s, exemplifies past efforts, but ongoing maintenance and future investments are critical for maintaining the gains achieved through that massive infrastructure investment, and current funding levels appear inadequate to the challenge. Honolulu, Hawaii, paradise lost to urban decay. The city's electricity costs are nearly 3 times the national average, and a gallon of milk costs over $6, exacerbating financial pressures that make paradise unlivable for anyone except the wealthy elite who can afford island living as a luxury rather than a place to build careers and raise families. The economic stagnation exposes a tourism-dependent economy in crisis that reveals the dangers of economic monoculture and the failure to diversify into sustainable industries that provide opportunities for residents. The Honolulu economy heavily relies on tourism, which has seen seen mixed trends in 2025, with early data showing a 3.8% increase in visitor arrivals in January 2025, 792,177 visitors, and a 10.3% increase in spending in March 2025, $1.99 billion. However, projections from Tourism Analytics suggest fewer domestic visitors in 2025 due to reduced airlift, with a 2.7% decline in U.S. travelers expected and a 1.7% dip in trans-Pacific U.S. air seats, 10.4 million in 2025. High vacation costs, with average daily hotel rates impacting mid-range travelers, and the lingering effects of wildfires in Maui further complicate tourism growth. Infrastructure challenges are devastating for an isolated island city that depends on efficient systems to maintain basic quality of life. Hawaii's overall grade is D+ from the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, reflecting widespread infrastructure problems. 6.9% of bridges are structurally deficient and have an average age of 60 years, and 66% of roads are in poor or fair condition, facing congestion and risks from sea level rise. Coastal areas are particularly vulnerable, with 5,700 structures and 40 miles of coastal roads at risk from a projected 3.2 feet sea level rise by 2100. Drinking water systems need $5 billion over 20 years for Honolulu, and wastewater systems require $3.2 billion statewide, with 88,000 cesspools posing health risks. The rail project represents a particular infrastructure disaster that symbolizes the broader failure of Hawaiian governance. The Honolulu Rail Skyline Phase 1 opened in June 2023, and the second segment is scheduled for October 2025, with completion to Ka'akaukukui Civic Center Station targeted for March 2031. However, funding disputes, including a Senate bill, SB 934, that could jeopardize hundreds of millions in funding, pose risks by requiring building a $330 million park and ride facility in Pearl Highlands and completing the entire line before accessing funds. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the capital's catastrophic collapse. The city's economic indicators expose devastating stagnation despite political advantages that should ensure prosperity and growth. The GDP for East Baton Rouge Parish was $39 billion in 2022, down 12% from 2018 when adjusted for inflation, indicating economic decline compared to the state's 2% drop. This means Baton Rouge is performing worse than Louisiana as a whole, which itself faces economic challenges from energy sector volatility and national economic trends. Historical economic data shows that Baton Rouge was losing GDP even before the coronavirus pandemic, bucking statewide trends and indicating problems specific to the capital city that go beyond regional or national economic forces. This long-term decline suggests structural problems with economic development, business climate, or governance that make Baton Rouge less competitive than other Louisiana cities. The crime statistics paint an absolutely terrifying picture that reveals why residents and businesses are fleeing Louisiana's capital city despite its political importance and governmental stability. Crime rates in Baton Rouge are notably high, with the city ranking among the top 100 most dangerous in the U.S., which represents a catastrophic failure for a state capital that should be among America's safest cities due to concentrations of law enforcement and government security. In 2023, violent crime stood at 1,028 per 100,000 residents, and property crimes at 5,852 per 100,000, both significantly above national averages. To put these numbers in perspective, that will absolutely shock you. Baton Rouge residents are more than twice as likely to be victims of violent crime compared to the national average, and nearly 3 times as likely to experience property crime.
It's Baton Rouge, like, man, it's the usual. You know, like, ain't nothing really, I was born, and that's, you know, it's the same, it's constant, it ain't really nothing different. It's not really something you should be afraid of, it's something you need to be prepared for, because if you was born and raised in Baton Rouge, you gonna go through that.
Homicide numbers at 102 in 2023 showed an increase in 2024, indicating that public safety is getting worse rather than better, despite law enforcement resources that should be available to a state capital. What makes these crime statistics particularly infuriating is that they represent the failure of state-level law enforcement coordination and resources that should give Baton Rouge advantages over other cities. When a state capital can't maintain public safety despite access to state police, federal law enforcement cooperation, and political attention, it reveals systematic failures in leadership and governance. If you enjoyed that video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch similar content.
Breaking tonight. In a shocking move, Amazon has just slashed 80,000 jobs, and the fallout is tied directly to the latest salvo in the growing economic battle between the U.S. and China.
We said we were going to take big bets. We said they were going to fail. We said some of them hopefully were going to work.
Amazon's bold, risk-taking playbook is facing a harsh reality. Massive layoffs hint at deeper pressures, both economic and geopolitical. Is this just cost-cutting or a sign of a major shift inside the company? Let's dig into what's driving this dramatic move. The breaking crisis. Let's examine what's really happening behind these massive job cuts and why they're happening now. The catalyst, a huge tariff wall erected by China in direct response to the Trump administration's aggressive trade policies. The result, a cascade of economic disruption rippling through America's largest companies. The trade tensions between the U.S. and China have reached unprecedented levels, with the Trump administration imposing tariffs of up to 145% on Chinese imports by April 2025. These tariffs were part of a strategy described as Liberation Day, aimed at rewiring global trade and reducing U.S. reliance on Chinese manufacturing. China has responded forcefully, hitting back with retaliatory tariffs reaching 125% on most American exports, effectively creating a tariff wall that has severely disrupted global supply chains. For Amazon, a company that sources approximately 25% of its first-party cost of goods sold from China and hosts a marketplace where over 50% of third-party sellers are Chinese-based, the impact has been immediate and severe. The tariff war has created an untenable business environment, forcing the e-commerce giant to slash its workforce in a desperate attempt to control costs. The tariff escalation follows months of deteriorating U.S.-China relations. In early 2025, President Trump implemented a sweeping tariff policy, starting with a 34% tariff on Chinese imports on top of an existing 20% levy. When China responded with their own 34% tariff, Trump doubled down, eventually pushing U.S. tariffs to 145% by mid-April, effectively freezing most goods trade between the two nations. These aren't just numbers on paper, they represent real costs to businesses and consumers. The Tax Foundation estimates that the Trump tariffs amount to an average tax increase of nearly $1,300 per U.S. household in 2025, reducing after-tax income by 1.2% and contributing to economic slowdown. For Amazon, a company built on offering competitive prices to consumers, these increased costs create an existential threat to their business model. The impact on Amazon's workforce has been devastating. Posts on X indicate that Amazon is cutting way back and firing a lot of people due to tariff issues, alongside UPS laying off 20,000 workers after losing a contract with Amazon. Another post by GD Limpsey notes Amazon cutting its outlook, warning of higher prices and falling demand, with tariffs as a major risk factor. The company has reportedly canceled direct import orders from China, leaving vendors with goods stranded at shipping ports. Amazon isn't alone in feeling the sting of this trade war. American businesses across sectors are struggling to adapt to the new reality. Imports from China are estimated to fall by $740 billion in 2025, a 22% reduction, as businesses cancel orders or seek alternative suppliers. At the Port of Los Angeles, the primary hub for Chinese goods, incoming vessel traffic is projected to drop by nearly half, with container bookings reduced by 60%. What makes Amazon's situation particularly precarious is its deep integration with Chinese supply chains. The elimination of the de minimis exemption, which previously allowed duty-free imports for shipments under $800, has increased costs for Amazon's low-cost platform, Amazon Haul, launched in 2024 to compete with Chinese e-commerce giants Shein and Temu. This change has eroded Amazon's ability to compete on price, forcing difficult decisions about staffing levels. The layoffs represent a tragic human cost to this economic warfare. Behind the numbers are real people, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, technical staff, and customer service representatives, now facing unemployment in an increasingly uncertain economy. Many of these employees had already been working under intense pressure, with Amazon's warehouses known for their demanding productivity metrics and high turnover rates. According to a 2021 investigation by the New York Times, Amazon's hourly workforce turnover was approximately 150% annually, meaning the company replaced nearly its entire warehouse workforce every 8 months. This rate was significantly higher than industry averages for retail and logistics. The current layoffs appear to be accelerating this pattern of workforce churn, but on a much larger scale. For Jeff Bezos, Amazon's founder and executive chairman, the tariff situation and resulting layoffs represent a complex challenge. Although no longer CEO, Bezos remains influential in the company's direction and has recently found himself directly involved in discussions with the Trump administration regarding Amazon's response to the tariffs. In a particularly revealing incident, President Trump personally called Bezos on April 29, 2025, after reports emerged that Amazon was planning to display the cost of tariffs next to product prices on its website. Trump reportedly expressed displeasure with this plan, viewing it as undermining his tariff policies by making their consumer impact transparent. A senior White House official told CNN, "Of course he was pissed. Why should a multi-billion-dollar company pass off costs to consumers?" Following this call, Amazon quickly backed down, issuing statements clarifying that the tariff display plan would not proceed. Trump later praised Bezos, telling reporters,
great. Jeff Bezos was very nice. He was terrific. He solved the problem very quickly, and he did the right thing, and he's a good guy.
This interaction highlights the political pressures Amazon faces in navigating the tariff situation. Even as it makes painful cuts to its workforce, the company must balance multiple competing interests, maintaining affordable prices for consumers, preserving shareholder value, complying with U.S. trade policies, and managing its massive global workforce. The broader economic implications of these layoffs and the ongoing trade war are profound. Amazon's decision to cut jobs is both a symptom and a warning of deeper economic troubles. The International Monetary Fund has revised its 2025 U.S. GDP growth forecast downward from 2.7% to 1.8%, attributing the decline to trade disruptions caused by tariffs. JP Morgan Research further lowered its 2025 real GDP growth estimate to 1.6%, citing heightened trade policy uncertainty and retaliatory measures. More alarmingly, the U.S. economy shrank by 0.3% in Q1 2025, the first contraction in 3 years. This downturn was partly attributed to tariff-related disruptions and the widened trade deficit as businesses rushed to import goods before tariffs took effect. Economists are increasingly concerned about the risk of stagflation, rising inflation coupled with stagnant growth, a challenging monetary policy environment reminiscent of the 1970s. Small businesses, particularly Amazon sellers, are expressing panic over tariffs' impact on their livelihoods. Forums like r/Amazon Seller and r/Entrepreneur highlight fears of insolvency due to increased costs and inability to relocate manufacturing. One seller shared, "My entire inventory comes from China. 145% tariffs mean I either raise prices and lose customers or eat the cost and go bankrupt." This mirrors CNBC's report of Amazon sellers' desperation, with some fearing closure. The situation is further complicated by domestic political dynamics. The Trump administration views tariffs as leverage to force China to open its markets and address issues like intellectual property theft. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has labeled China's economy as imbalanced and argued that the tariffs are a corrective measure. However, critics argue that tariffs mainly hurt American consumers and businesses rather than Chinese exporters. As we look at the human impact of these massive job cuts at Amazon, we must consider the broader economic context. These laid-off workers join a growing number of Americans affected by the escalating trade war. The ripple effects extend far beyond Amazon, touching suppliers, service providers, and local economies where Amazon has a significant presence. The economic impact and response. The massive layoffs at Amazon represent more than just corporate cost-cutting. They signal a fundamental restructuring of the American economy in response to changing global trade dynamics. To understand the true scale of this development, we need to look more closely at Amazon's internal workforce strategies and the specific impacts of China's retaliatory tariffs on their business model. Amazon's approach to workforce management has long been characterized by high turnover and rigorous performance metrics. According to reports, former CEO Jeff Bezos believed that a tenured, long-serving workforce could lead to complacency, which he reportedly called a march to mediocrity. To counter this, Amazon allegedly designed policies to encourage turnover, ensuring a fresh, driven workforce. A Reddit thread from 2024 referenced a video claiming Bezos saw high turnover as beneficial, with an ideal employee joining, working intensely, and then leaving after a short period. The thread quoted a belief attributed to Bezos that a tenured workforce is a lazy workforce. This philosophy is reflected in Amazon's pay-to-quit program, which offered warehouse employees up to $10,000 to leave voluntarily, a strategy to ensure only dedicated employees remained. But the current layoffs are different. Rather than the controlled attrition Amazon has historically cultivated, these cuts represent an urgent response to economic pressures created by the tariff war. Amazon's reliance on Chinese manufacturing has made it particularly vulnerable to the current trade tensions. The Shenzhen Cross-Border E-Commerce Association, representing over 3,000 Amazon sellers, reported that Chinese sellers plan price hikes of 20 to 50% or may exit the U.S. market entirely due to unsustainable costs. For Amazon, whose business model depends on competitive pricing and vast product selection, this represents an existential threat. The numbers tell a stark story. According to SmartScout data, since early April 2025, nearly 1,000 products on Amazon saw price increases, with an average hike of 30%. Amazon's statement noted that these hikes affect only 1% of the top 100,000 products, with the most common increase increase being 6%, suggesting Smart Scout's 30% average may be skewed by outliers. Nevertheless, the trend is clear. Tariffs are driving up prices across Amazon's platform. A Chinese seller reported that children's building blocks costing $3 to produce now cost $7 with tariffs, requiring a 20% price increase to maintain margins. Higher-cost toys could see 50% increases. This illustrates the direct impact of the tariff wall on consumer prices and explains why Amazon has been forced to take drastic measures. The elimination of the de minimis exemption, which previously allowed duty-free imports for shipments under $800, has been particularly damaging for Amazon's business model. This change took effect on May 2, 2025, and has significantly increased costs for Amazon Haul, Amazon's low-cost platform competing with Shein and Temu. These platforms had relied heavily on the exemption to keep prices low for direct-from-China shipments. The financial impact on Amazon has been severe. The company reported a $1 billion hit in Q1 2025 due to tariff-related charges and customer returns. Bezos's net worth has reportedly declined by $30 billion since January 2025, partly due to tariffs and stock market volatility. With Amazon shares down 17% in 2025, the pressure to cut costs has become overwhelming. Beyond the headline numbers, the layoffs reflect Amazon's strategic response to a changing economic landscape. The company is taking several approaches to mitigate the impact of tariffs. 1. Price management. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy stated on CNBC that the company is doing everything we can to keep prices low, including renegotiating terms with suppliers. 2. Supply chain diversification. Amazon is exploring suppliers in countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and India, where tariffs are lower than China's 145%. This shift aims to reduce reliance on Chinese goods. 3. Workforce reduction. The massive layoffs represent the most immediate and drastic cost-cutting measure, allowing Amazon to quickly reduce expenses as it navigates the new trade environment. The human stories behind these numbers are compelling. Workers who built careers at Amazon now find themselves suddenly unemployed in an economy showing troubling signs of contraction. Many of these employees were already subject to intense performance pressure, with automated systems tracking metrics like time off task, idle time, and rate, items processed per hour. If workers failed to meet targets, the system could issue warnings or terminate contracts without human intervention. A 2019 report revealed that Amazon fired over 300 workers at its Baltimore fulfillment center, BWI2, for failing to meet productivity targets, representing over 10% of the facility's 2,500 full-time staff. The current layoffs dwarf these figures, suggesting a fundamental shift in Amazon's workforce strategy beyond its usual high turnover model. The situation is particularly dire for workers in specialized roles tied to Amazon's China-focused operations. Teams managing Chinese imports, translation services, and marketplace seller support have reportedly seen deep cuts. These employees possess skills specifically tailored to U.S.-China trade, which may be less transferable to other industries or markets. Meanwhile, Amazon's competitors are grappling with similar challenges. Temu and Shein, heavily reliant on the now eliminated de minimis exemption, have implemented significant price hikes. Temu introduced an import charge at checkout, adding up to 145% to item costs, while Shein has raised prices across its platform. This creates a level playing field in one sense, but also means all major e-commerce players are now facing the same pressures to reduce costs, potentially triggering layoffs across the sector. The impact extends beyond retail. UPS, a major logistics partner for Amazon, has announced 20,000 job cuts, partly due to reduced shipping volumes from Amazon. This demonstrates how Amazon's response to tariffs creates ripple effects throughout the supply chain, amplifying the economic damage. The situation has become a political flashpoint. The White House has responded aggressively to any suggestion that tariffs are driving prices higher. When reports emerged that Amazon was considering displaying tariff costs on product pages, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt condemned it as a hostile and political act during a press briefing. This led to President Trump's direct intervention with a call to Jeff Bezos, causing Amazon to quickly abandon the plan. Trump's administration has consistently argued that tariffs are paid by foreign producers rather than American consumers, a claim disputed by economists but central to the political narrative around trade policy. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick supported the White House position, calling Amazon's reported plan nonsense and claiming a 10% tariff wouldn't significantly raise prices. However, the reality being experienced by businesses and consumers tells a different story, with price increases already evident across Amazon's platform. For the broader economy, the Amazon layoffs serve as a warning sign of deeper troubles. The Port of Los Angeles, the primary hub for Chinese goods, reports that arrivals from China could drop by 35% within weeks due to halted shipments. UBS analysts note that trade between the U.S. and China has essentially been completely severed, as both sides now tax 100% of each other's goods. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Survey in April 2025 showed expectations for inflation to rise to 6.7%, the highest since 1981, reflecting fears of tariff-induced price hikes. The Conference Board reported that U.S. consumer confidence fell for the fifth consecutive month in April 2025, reaching its lowest level since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Nearly one-third of consumers expect hiring to slow, a level last seen during the 2009 Great Recession. These economic indicators suggest that Amazon's layoffs may be just the beginning of a broader contraction. Goldman Sachs estimates a 45% chance of a U.S. recession within 12 months, while economist Joseph Brusuelas of RSM pegs the recession probability at 55%. Even more alarming, Torsten Slok of Apollo Global Management warns of a 90% chance of recession by summer 2025 if tariffs persist. The S&P 500 fell nearly 5% on April 3, 2025, its worst day since June 2020, and dropped below 5,000 for the first time in nearly a year by April 8, down 18.9% from its February 19th peak. S&P 500 companies lost $5.8 trillion in market value over 4 days following Trump's initial tariff announcement on April 2nd, the deepest 4-day loss since the index's creation. For Amazon, workers caught in this perfect storm, the future is uncertain. Many are scrambling to find new employment in a job market showing signs of weakening. Those with specialized skills in e-commerce may find opportunities with Amazon's competitors or in adjacent industries, but the scale of the layoffs means that competition for available positions is intense. The geographical impact of the layoffs is unevenly distributed, with communities heavily dependent on Amazon employment facing particular challenges. Cities with major fulfillment centers or corporate offices, such as Seattle, Nashville, and Kentucky's northern region, are seeing significant local economic effects as thousands of newly unemployed workers reduce spending at local businesses. The human cost and future implications. As the dust settles on Amazon's massive workforce reduction, we must examine the broader implications for America's economic future and the changing dynamics of global trade. These numerous job cuts represent more than just corporate cost-cutting. They signal a fundamental shift in the relationship between the world's two largest economies and raise questions about the sustainability of globalized supply chains. The scale of these layoffs is unprecedented in Amazon's history. Previous reductions, even during major economic downturns, never approached this magnitude. In 2022 and 2023, Amazon cut approximately 27,000 employees across corporate and tech roles, including divisions like Amazon Web Services, AWS, advertising, and retail. These were attributed to overhiring during the pandemic and a need to streamline operations amid economic uncertainty. What makes this situation particularly alarming is the rapid deterioration of U.S.-China trade relations and the unprecedented scale of tariffs from both sides. China's 125% tariffs, combined with non-tariff measures like adding 11 U.S. companies to its unreliable entities list and restricting exports of rare earth elements, have severely curtailed U.S.-China trade. The World Trade Organization predicts an 81% plunge in U.S.-China trade in 2025, contributing to a 0.2% decline in global goods trade. Amazon's vulnerability stems from its deep integration with Chinese supply chains. The company's marketplace hosts thousands of Chinese sellers directly shipping to U.S. consumers, and many of its private label products are manufactured in China. The end of the de minimis exemption, which previously allowed duty-free imports for shipments under $800, has been particularly damaging for Amazon's business model. For workers affected by the layoffs, the consequences are severe. Many Amazon employees, particularly those in fulfillment centers, were already operating in a high-pressure environment with challenging working conditions. A 2021 investigation reported that Amazon's hourly workforce turnover was approximately 150% annually, meaning the company replaced nearly its entire warehouse workforce every 8 months. This rate was significantly higher than industry averages for retail and logistics. The layoffs exacerbate existing issues of economic inequality and job insecurity. Amazon's fulfillment centers, which power its e-commerce operations, have an exceptionally high turnover rate and often employ workers from vulnerable populations. A 2021 investigation by the New York Times reported that at Amazon's JFK 8 warehouse in Staten Island, New York, over 60% of workers were Black or Latino, and Black associates associates were 50% more likely to be fired than their white counterparts for reasons including productivity, misconduct, or absenteeism. This racial disparity in terminations raises concerns about whether the current layoffs might disproportionately affect minority workers. While no comprehensive data on the demographic breakdown of these layoffs is available, historical patterns suggest that warehouse workers, who are more likely to be racial minorities and have fewer employment alternatives, may bear a heavier burden than corporate employees. The economic ripple effects extend far beyond Amazon itself. Small businesses that sell on Amazon's platform are caught in a difficult position. Many rely on Chinese manufacturers for their inventory and now face unsustainable cost increases. The Shenzhen Cross-Border E-Commerce Association reports that Chinese sellers plan price hikes of 20 to 50% or may exit the U.S. market entirely due to tariffs. One seller shared on Reddit, "My entire inventory comes from China. 145% tariffs mean I either raise prices and lose customers or eat the cost and go bankrupt." This sentiment was echoed across e-commerce forums, with many small business owners expressing existential fear about their ability to continue operating under the new tariff regime. Amazon's response to the tariff situation has been multifaceted. Beyond the massive layoffs, the company has taken several steps to mitigate the impact of tariffs. 1. Supply chain diversification. Amazon is exploring a $15 billion expansion of its U.S. warehouse network to reduce reliance on overseas inventory. Sellers like Zule Kitchen are shifting production to India and Mexico, though this takes time and involves significant costs. 2. Inventory management. Amazon has canceled some Chinese orders to avoid tariff costs and is optimizing restock strategies to account for higher landed costs. 3. Prime Day planning. Some sellers are reducing discounts or sitting out Prime Day 2025 due to tariff costs, potentially impacting Amazon sales during what is typically a major revenue event. 4. Merchant communication. Amazon has emailed sellers to gauge the impact of tariffs, indicating proactive monitoring of supply chain disruptions. 5. Price adjustments. Despite efforts to absorb costs, price increases are inevitable. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy has stated the company is doing everything we can to keep prices low, including renegotiating terms with suppliers. The political dimension of this economic crisis cannot be overlooked. The Trump administration views tariffs as leverage to force China to open its markets and address issues like intellectual property theft. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent labeled China's economy as imbalanced and argued that the tariffs are a corrective measure. However, the White House has shown sensitivity to any suggestion that tariffs are driving higher consumer prices. When reports emerged that Amazon planned to display tariff costs next to product prices, the response was swift and forceful. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called it a hostile and political act, and President Trump personally called Jeff Bezos to express his displeasure.
I will take this since I just got off the phone with the president about Amazon's announcement. This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years? And I would also add that it's not a surprise because, as Reuters recently wrote, Amazon has partnered with a Chinese propaganda arm. So this is another reason why Americans should buy American.
Amazon's quick retreat, issuing statements clarifying that the tariff display plan would not proceed, highlights the political pressures facing major corporations in the current trade environment. Bezos, who has worked to improve relations with the Trump administration since the 2024 election, prioritized political accommodation over transparency about tariff impacts on consumers. This interaction underscores how the economic pain of tariffs has become a politically charged issue. The Trump administration maintains that tariffs are paid by foreign producers rather than American consumers, a claim disputed by economists but central to the political narrative around trade policy. Any acknowledgement by major retailers that tariffs are driving price increases threatens this narrative. Meanwhile, China's response to U.S. tariffs has been equally aggressive. Beyond matching tariffs, China has implemented non-tariff measures like adding U.S. companies to its unreliable entities list and restricting exports of rare earth elements essential for U.S. high-tech industries. The country has also targeted U.S. services, particularly travel and education, which account for a $55 billion surplus. Restrictions on Chinese students, 270,000 in the U.S., and film imports could reduce U.S. service exports. China's strategy appears designed to maximize economic pressure while minimizing self-harm. The country has quietly created a white list of U.S. goods exempt from the 125% tariffs, including critical products like pharmaceuticals, microchips, jet engines, and ethane, which are vital for Chinese industries. increase. These exemptions are not publicly announced but communicated privately to companies, allowing China to maintain a hardline stance while addressing domestic needs. For Amazon and other U.S. companies, the challenge is navigating this complex and rapidly changing trade environment. The layoffs represent a drastic but perhaps necessary response to unprecedented economic pressures. However, they also raise questions about the long-term viability of business models that depend heavily on globalized supply chains and cheap imports. The broader economic outlook is concerning. The U.S. economy shrank by 0.3% in Q1 2025, the first contraction in 3 years, down from 2.4% growth in Q4 2024, partly attributed to tariff-related disruptions. The trade war has accelerated the decoupling of the U.S. and Chinese economies, with bilateral trade expected to fall precipitously. While this could reduce U.S. reliance on Chinese goods, it risks isolating the U.S. from global supply chains, especially in critical minerals like rare earths, where China holds near-exclusive control. For workers caught in this economic reshuffling, the future is uncertain. The Conference Board reported that U.S. consumer confidence fell for the 5th consecutive month in April 2025, reaching its lowest level since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Nearly one-third of consumers expect hiring to slow, a level last seen during the 2009 Great Recession. The geographic impact of the layoffs is uneven, with communities heavily dependent on Amazon employment facing particular challenges. Cities with major fulfillment centers or corporate offices are seeing significant local economic effects as thousands of newly unemployed workers reduce spending at local businesses. The tariff war and resulting layoffs also highlight the vulnerabilities of just-in-time global supply chains. For decades, companies like Amazon have optimized for efficiency, sourcing products from the lowest-cost global suppliers. This model worked well in an era of relatively free trade and political stability. However, the current trade tensions expose the fragility of these arrangements and suggest a future where supply chain resilience may take precedence over cost efficiency. Some economists and industry analysts suggest that the current disruption, while painful, may ultimately lead to a more balanced and resilient global trading system. By reducing excessive dependence on Chinese manufacturing, U.S. companies may develop more diverse supply networks, potentially creating new jobs in domestic manufacturing or in countries with more stable trading relationships with the U.S. However, this transition will take time and involve significant costs. The abrupt nature of the current tariff escalation has left companies like Amazon with few immediate options besides workforce reductions. A more gradual approach to trade reform might have allowed for smoother adaptation and less severe job losses. For Amazon, the challenge now is to rebuild its business model in a world where U.S.-China trade may never return to previous levels. This will likely involve accelerating diversification efforts, investing in automation to reduce labor costs, and potentially passing more costs on to consumers through higher prices. For more insights into the evolving economic landscape, check out the recommended videos popping up right now.